There's a man who barely texts back, who cancels plans without guilt, who seems perfectly fine whether you're around or not. And somehow, he's the one you can't stop thinking about. Most people call that self-sabotage. Psychology calls it something else entirely. Because what you're about to hear isn't about weakness or bad taste in men. It's about a mechanism so deeply wired into the human brain that even the most self-aware women fall straight into it and almost never understand why until it's too late. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what's driving that pull and what it's quietly costing you. This isn't a rare thing. Across cultures, across decades, across every type of woman imaginable, the pattern shows up. Confident women, educated women, women who would never describe themselves as desperate. She checks her phone again. He hasn't replied. She replays the last conversation looking for what she did wrong. She tells herself to stop caring and then cares more. The man who ignores her isn't necessarily cruel. He might not even be doing it on purpose. But the effect is always the same. The less he gives, the more she wants. Researchers studying reward psychology have spent decades trying to explain this. And what they've found goes far deeper than playing hard to get. We're going to walk through 7 reasons this happens, starting with the one that surprises almost everyone. Number 1, the brain isn't chasing him. It's chasing the reward. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The pull you feel toward a man who ignores you has very little to do with him specifically. In the 1950s, psychologist B.F. Skinner ran experiments with rats and reward levers. When the lever gave food every single time, the rats used it, then stopped. When the lever gave food randomly, unpredictably, the rats became obsessed. They pressed it compulsively, even when exhausted, even when it stopped working entirely. That pattern, called intermittent reinforcement, is one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms ever documented. It works exactly the same way in human attraction. When his attention comes in unpredictable bursts, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes nothing at all, your brain doesn't disengage. It locks in. You're not chasing him. You're chasing the next hit of reward. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because the brain isn't just reacting to what happens, it's reacting to what might happen. Number 2, dopamine peaks on uncertainty, not on pleasure. Most people assume the brain releases dopamine when something good happens. But neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz found something more precise than that. Dopamine doesn't peak at the reward. It peaks in the moment of anticipation, specifically when the outcome is uncertain. In Schultz's research, dopamine activity was highest when subjects expected a reward but weren't sure they'd get it. Guaranteed rewards barely move the needle. This is why a man who texts back immediately, every time, who shows up reliably, who makes his feelings clear, doesn't create the same neurological intensity as one who makes you wonder. The brain has been hijacked. It's running a program built for survival. Prioritize unpredictable outcomes. Keep scanning for patterns. Don't let go until the loop closes. The problem is, the loop never closes. That's the whole mechanism. Now here's where it gets a little more complicated, because this is the part most women don't fully understand about themselves. Number 3, your attachment style is amplifying everything. Not every woman responds to unavailable men the same way. The reason comes down to attachment theory, the framework developed by psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. Bowlby found that children form mental models of love based on how reliably their caregivers responded to them. Children with consistent, attuned caregivers develop secure attachment. They grow up expecting love to be stable. But children whose caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes just not present, develop anxious attachment. And anxiously attached people don't just tolerate emotional unpredictability. Their nervous system treats it as familiar, as normal, as the shape that love is supposed to take. For a woman with anxious attachment, a man who is fully present and emotionally steady can feel almost unsettling. Not because she doesn't want it, but because her nervous system doesn't recognize it as the version of love she was wired to seek. And this next one, most people in her life get it completely wrong. Number 4, it has nothing to do with low self-esteem. The most common thing people say when a woman admits she keeps chasing unavailable men is, you just need to love yourself more. It sounds helpful, it isn't accurate, because this pattern doesn't require low self-esteem to operate. Relationship therapist Harville Hendricks, who developed imagotherapy, found that people are unconsciously drawn to partners who recreate the emotional dynamics of their earliest relationships, not to suffer, but to try to resolve them. The pull toward an emotionally withholding man isn't a sign she thinks poorly of herself. It's the psyche running a repair program, trying to finally win the love that once felt conditional. The self-esteem advice misses the root entirely. And that's exactly why it doesn't work. If you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand what's happening underneath the surface, not just the behavior, but the real psychology driving it, and you're still here, that tells me something about you. It would mean a lot if you hit subscribe. We release videos like this every week. Real psychology explained in a way that actually makes sense for real people. Number 5, the hidden cost nobody warns you about. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The longer you chase someone who withholds, the more your nervous system recalibrates what feels like attraction. Researcher Dorothy Tenov, who studied limerence, the state of obsessive romantic fixation, found that the intensity of the chase actively reshapes your emotional baseline. Men who are consistent, available, and openly caring start to register as flat, unexciting, even suspiciously eager. Not because they're boring, but because they don't trigger the dopamine cycle your brain has been trained to expect. You don't just lose interest in one unavailable man, you gradually lose the ability to feel genuinely drawn to men who would actually be good for you. That's the real cost. And most women don't see it happening until years later. But this is the root underneath all of it. Number 6, it started before any man was involved. Carl Jung wrote about the wounds we carry not as flaws, but as the places where our deepest patterns are formed. Modern attachment research backs this up with remarkable precision. When a child's first experience of love is conditional, when warmth had to be earned, when affection was unpredictable, when a caregiver's mood determined whether the child felt safe, the child doesn't decide this is wrong. The child decides this is what love is. That internal map doesn't reset when you become an adult. It runs quietly in the background, selecting for situations that feel familiar. The man who makes you feel uncertain doesn't feel dangerous. He feels like home. This is why logic alone doesn't fix it. You can know everything we've covered in this video and still feel the pull, because the pull isn't coming from your reasoning mind. It's coming from a version of you that learned very early that love requires waiting. Which brings us to the last one, and honestly, the most important. Number 7, understanding the mechanism is how you change it. Here's what no one tells you. You cannot think your way out of this pattern, but you can build new ones. Clinical psychologist Sue Johnson, who developed emotionally focused therapy, found that anxious attachment cycles can be interrupted, but only when a person first recognizes the pattern as a pattern, not as evidence of who they are or what they deserve. When you understand that the pull toward unavailable men is a neurological loop, not a measure of your worth, something shifts. You can observe the feeling without obeying it. You can feel the dopamine spike for the man who barely texts back, and also choose to ask yourself, is this familiar because it's right or because it's old? The men who feel too easy, too available, too clear about wanting you, they don't need to become exciting. You need to become fluent in a different kind of love. One that doesn't feel like a chase. One that feels like ground. And that's worth far more than any hit of intermittent dopamine. So the next time you feel that pull toward the man who barely notices you, who gives just enough and then disappears, you know what's actually happening. Your brain is running a program it learned before you could read. A program that says love is something you earn through persistence. That the harder you have to work for someone's attention, the more it must be worth having. That program isn't broken. It was adaptive once. It kept a child connected to a caregiver who couldn't always be present, but it was never meant to run forever. The man who shows up consistently, who communicates clearly, who doesn't make you wonder he isn't boring. You've been reading ease as the absence of value, and that reading was never yours to begin with. You can choose a different map. If you want to go deeper on how early attachment patterns shape every relationship that comes after, I put together a video on exactly that, and I think it will hit just as hard. It's right here when you're ready.